Good morning, or perhaps a good evening, listeners. After watching this week's episode of Wistoria Wand and Sword, I felt this nagging urge to discuss the show and put my thoughts out there, and maybe try to speculate a little bit on where the show is going and what the overall pacing will be. However, before I get into the discussion proper, I will preface this video with the one and only spoiler warning I will ever give. To put it bluntly, I just don't believe in spoilers, and I don't think you should either. The concept of a spoiler is a bit of a catch-22, isn't it? If you need context to understand how a spoiler is a spoiler, then it isn't a spoiler. It's just a small piece of information you know nothing about that you can't use to extrapolate the rest of the story with. And if you don't need context to extrapolate the rest of the story, then you know what the story is and you have no reason to be afraid of the spoilers. Whinging about spoilers interrupts discussion, and the fact that I even felt the need to spend the extra time making this stupid disclaimer bothers me. Having said all that, this video will contain discussions of the structure of the adaptation, so watch at your own risk. And to anyone still listening, let's get this show on the road. Wistoria is the show that I affectionately refer to as the most satisfyingly predictable show of this season. This also makes the discussion of spoilers in the show kind of hilarious, but that's not what this video is actually about. This show has an incredibly straightforward narrative. Every turn or twist is perfectly predictable to the degree of almost feeling kind of treacherous right up until your prediction comes true. Despite its predictability, I feel like it's an incredibly good show, which is why I say satisfyingly predictable. Everything you think should happen pretty much does happen. And in my opinion, being able to pull that off in a satisfying way is the mark of a good story. This means that what matters is when you see it happen. The execution itself is the exciting part of the show. Although I think the same could be said for all ideas anyone has. Ideas themselves are a dime a dozen, but the execution is what makes them special. However, episode 6 is probably the most interesting episode the show has had, not because of any twists or turns or unexpected events, but because the execution itself is different from the manga in significant ways. Episodes 1 through 5 have pretty much been panel for panel mirrors of the manga, with not very many actual offshoots. Despite the story being kind of derivative on paper, the main appeal, in my opinion, is the mentality and methodology of the main character and the clarity of all the other characters and situations. You kind of know what you're going to get from the very beginning. It's the way they deliver what you expect to see in such a fantastical and interesting way that really draws the hype out of this show. I have been personally surprised by how entirely comfortable and perfectly enthralled I am when watching this series. And episode 5 left me so hyped that I really felt like I needed to just catch up with the manga because I couldn't sit still and wait to see what was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen. We all know what's going to happen, but I needed to see it. Having read the manga up to its current point, I can assure anyone watching, really, really cool stuff is on the way in the story. But you should and will be able to predict most of it, even if I don't say anything. However, my main concern has now become the pacing, specifically of this, I assume and hope, first season of many. I can't necessarily determine whether or not the pacing is good or bad yet, but episode 6 has me somewhat cautiously curious about what the rest of the season is going to look like. As most of you probably know, most anime are made to advertise its companion manga. In doing so, they endeavor to leave the audience on a satisfying and exciting position to continue the story after some major arc's ending. Right now, we're about halfway through this season, I assume, and by episode 5, I thought I had speculated correctly what episode 6 would be, and extrapolated the rest of the season from there based on what I saw in the manga. But episode 6 left me a bit blindsided and I'm not sure if I want to say disappointed yet. I think time will tell on that. Either way, for me, this week's episode has been the most interesting episode so far because it includes anime original content. And so far, this is the only such content the show has had. Going into the episode, the opening recap had me worried that the pacing would start to be impacted. I also noticed along the way some reused animations and extra somewhat pointless reaction shots that pad the length, but contribute to what pieces of the story have been added somewhat. Naturally, my immediate thoughts were, oh no, they're actually going to spend the whole episode on content that should have been 1/3 of the time. I began to wonder what they were going to do to pad out the extra length, but was pleasantly surprised to see the flashbacks. I'm still not sure on that. These flashbacks are weird, and I feel a bit contentious about them because these flashbacks alter Shion's character presentation significantly, for better or worse. You could call it fleshed out, or you could call it unnecessary, but you could probably also call it misrepresenting the character. The effect of what these flashbacks have shown us is that it has changed Shion's apparent motivation and reasoning for his focus on Will from "I worked hard, but he's better than me and probably sneered at me the whole time" to "he rejected my friendship, so I hate him now, and I can't really tell which of those two is more petty." Despite it being a clear, but still entirely unnecessary attempt at humanizing Shion, outside of, being a big bully. I can, however, make the claim that one of those is a much more interesting and appropriate character for this story. And it's not the one with the spurned homosexual affections. See, from what we've seen in the show so far, and what we now have seen from these flashbacks, they've kind of changed what the perspective of all of Shion's actions leading up to this point have been. I don't know if maybe this is just repeating what I've already said, but effectively, Shion's motivations have been reduced from being mad about him being better and also taking Colette away, and using that anger to try and justify his extra efforts to prove his dominance, to being mad at Will for prioritizing his romantic affection over wanting to kiss Shion's ass for the rest of his academic career. And this also has the compounding effect of calling into question everyone else's fixation on Will. Now that we know Shion has just had a hilarious rival boner for Will for the whole time he's been here, and that episode 1's events weren't even the trigger for his behavior right now, just the final straw, everyone else's excuse for their behavior regarding Will being he's incompatible with our worldviews so we don't like him seems to hold much less water in terms of structuring the world building and mentalities of the people in this world. It makes it seem like, in comparison to Shion's newly added personal element of this dynamic with Will, everyone else's worldviews are secondary, when I feel like the disparity in worldview is the main point of the story, and it would be best portrayed by the actual main rival character, rather than giving the main rival character a new personal element to his problems with the main character, and everyone else just seeming entirely petty. One thing it seems like the anime's interpretation of these events and of Shion's character have kind of missed in portraying is that a lot of Shion's early feelings towards Will were just feelings of pure admiration, actually. He seriously admired Will for his complete and utter tenacity in his endeavors all the way from the beginning, and that's what this panel in the manga is supposed to be representing. And a lot of the discussion leading up to this is supposed to have been representing. And I mean, just the way his words are portrayed and the way the history is given to us in the manga just lets it all lean more in the direction of he's an amazing person, and I hate the fact that I can't match up to his level of tenacity. That was it. None of this be my underling bullshit. None of this going up to him and trying to protect him from the bullies by burning the kick me stamp or whatever, and being pissed off when he turned away from my offer. It just seems weird. And the part that's really pissing Shihen off to the point of betraying him in the middle of the Grand Magic Festival and even shedding tears over this event isn't that Will rejected his friendship when they were children. It's that the person he's spent all this time looking towards and admiring for his sheer tenacity and willpower just doesn't care about him and is refusing to acknowledge the effort he's put in specifically to match up to him. And the consistency of that mentality throughout the entire story makes sense because it is the core theme of the story. I struggled so hard to reach this person's level. What are my efforts amounting to? That's the theme of the story. And for Will and Shihen to both typify that theme in equal measure as the lead character and the rival character, it just makes a lot more sense the way the manga did it. It's a lot cleaner. And I can't really get behind what the anime is presented here the more I think about it. All things considered, the choice to add all this extra content for the sake of rounding out the pacing so that each episode has a consistently engaging set of events is probably a good idea, but I just can't help but feel like the stuff that they pulled out of their ass for this kinda doesn't work. In fact, I think all it really accomplished was that it kinda muddied the character drama a bit. Now Shihen is supposed to be like a bit more immediately sympathetic, I guess, or humanized or something, but we didn't need this. Not that we didn't need to humanize Shihen, we just didn't need to do it in this way. The focus has shifted too much into Shihen's personal affectations, is what I think that's the main point I'm trying to get out. I have a hard time really explaining why that makes me feel that way, but it just seems really wrong. All I can really say is that it's not the choice I would have made. In fact, if there needed to be extra content added to pad out the runtime of this conflict in this part of the story, I think I would have rather seen more context given to what this mysterious undisclosed event that took place 5 years ago between Will Collette and Shihen that has apparently so defined their relationships to each other as they are now. We keep seeing in their character bios that something happened around 5 to 4 years ago that changed their perspectives with each other. I want to know what that was. And to put it bluntly, as a straight male, mostly, defining your rivalry based off of an event where you now understand that your crush is interested in this guy you think is apparently not worth much just makes a lot more sense than what we're being presented with. At the very least, it's more in line with the straightforward and simplistic storytelling we've been getting. I'm sure it'll make the Fujoshis happy, but that's just not what I'm here for. Not if it comes at the cost of the actual understanding of the characters and drastically shifting their emotional perspective like this. Besides, we've got some real Fujo bait on the way. If they keep everything as it is in the manga from this point forward, then I guarantee episode 8 is not going to disappoint. The basis for many of the redemptive moments that many of the characters will have later on, including Julius, falls into one of two categories. Either I saw him do the thing, so now I have to respect him, or he did something nice for me, so despite how I treated him, I will forever acknowledge him from now on. But Shihen was the first to see him do the thing, and it made him double down on his efforts and his ire like it would for any good Vegeta analog. But now the logic behind the mentality has kind of been infused with this weird, unnecessary infatuation rather than a straightforward recognition of his skill and desire to surpass him. Suffice it to say, The version of this character that exists in the manga felt that he needed to prove something to himself. The anime character kind of feels like he's trying to prove something to Will, and that's dumb and gay in every meaning of that phrase. Still though, I'm actually kind of impressed they took the extra time and effort to make the content to justify the extra time spent on this relatively minor conflict in the manga. And considering the further pacing of the rest of the story, the Julius fight getting a full episode dedicated to it is actually probably a really good move, considering it involves one of the best moments in the whole manga so far. Like, I'm not even kidding. Episode 7 is probably going to be really great. I know a personal favorite moment of mine is coming up. And that aside, more content than just the Shihen focus was added. I'm really unsure of the implication of this extra conversation between Iris and Rosti. First of all, it's anime original, and for manga readers, anything regarding Rosti is up in the air for various reasons. This character is a big point of speculation. And on a side note, I gotta say, I'm slightly disappointed by the censoring of Colette's battle damage. In the anime, she's barely showing any midriff, which kinda makes Shihen's reaction to seeing her completely unjustified, or at least a little bit exaggerated. It just seems weird. In the manga, she had some small tatters that exposed a bit of her brassiere, but it's so strange. And this is a minor nitpick, but it bothers me because A, are we really going out of our way to change something like this when Elfaria is still running around with no panties? And B, really? The director of Chainsaw Man and the writer of Don Machi are making a show squeamish about fan service? I'm honestly disappointed, but it doesn't really impact the story or the pacing, so just seems kind of weirdly safe for no reason, and that's enough to distract me, but not enough to really make me upset. But the real question I'm contemplating now is exactly what is going to happen from here, right? See, I don't know exactly how many episodes the rest of this series will have, because it's not really stated anywhere. It could be a 2-cour, 1-season show, or maybe a second season is coming out sometime later, or the most likely case, it's going to be a single-cour season. Considering that there really isn't much content past where a 2-cour season would feasibly end, unless they start really padding it out, which would just be disappointing. So, in the likely case that we will be getting a 12 to 13 episode show, we're officially just over the halfway point. Anyone who's read the manga knows that from here there are 2 major incoming events that could feasibly be covered within a single core show, with the episodes we have left. The All-Student Praxis arc and the Terminalia event. I won't go into detail about what either of those are. But if the Julius fight is going to take all of episode 7 like I suspect, Episode 8 will be a transition episode into the All-Student Praxis. Episode 9 and 10, or 11, will probably be that entire arc, but I really don't feel like it's necessary to spend 3 episodes just on the All-Student Praxis. I wonder who would agree with that. And lastly, the Terminalia event will probably be covered from episodes 11 to 12 or 13 if we're getting a full 13 episodes, which I think would pretty much round it out really well. I think it's highly unlikely, and honestly, I would genuinely consider it bad pacing at that point if the story ends with the All-Student Praxis event. Now, when I say bad pacing, I mean that in terms of what could potentially be satisfactorily covered in the time we have, and what would be the best place to stop for the goals of the anime, being that it wants to, get people excited to continue in the manga, or at the very least wait for a second season. And ending it at the All-Student Praxis would be a bad place for the season to end, since it's just not a satisfying place for the end of a season, and the Terminalia event would be much, much better. They could do it, so if they don't, it's kind of just a misuse of time. And I think that's just about everything I had to say about this week's episode. I may or may not feel the need to make more discussion videos about the future episodes. I'm still very much excited for the show, so it might be worthwhile. And hey, if you're seeing this video and you might think it would be interesting to discuss, or maybe even interesting to see me get my first time reactions to the show, please let me know and I will endeavor to satisfy. This is the first proper video I've actually made in a long time, and I don't know if I'm really going to invest time into making more regular content, so I suppose there's really no need to ask you to subscribe just yet. Maybe just keep an eye out. See if I end up coming up with anything else, and if I do, you might even see them being, set up in the blurb that you're seeing at the end of this video right now. But other than that, I think that's it for this one, and we'll see you in the next one, guys. Thank you for listening.